Imagine, right, hauling heavy rocks out of a freezing river in ancient Britain.
Oh, yeah, just brutal manual labor.
Exactly. You load them onto a boat and transport them across the entire continent of Europe. I mean, thousands of miles over completely unforgiving terrain.
Right.
And all of this just to build a slightly better sword for a king down in the Mediterranean.
It sounds made up.
It totally sounds impossible for people living, 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But that is exactly what happened.
Yeah, it really did.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and we are jumping into a comprehensive Wikipedia article detailing the history, the tech, and the global spread of the Bronze Age.
And I'm thrilled to be here as the resident expert for this one because this era is just fascinating.
Right, because our mission today is to take you, the listener, on a journey way beyond those dusty textbook definitions of ancient history you probably remember from school.
Yeah, the stuff that makes you fall asleep in class.
Exactly. We want to explore how the seemingly simple act of, mixing two metals together didn't just create harder tools. It actually sparked the birth of massive global trade networks, written language, and basically complex urban society as we know it today.
It really is the crux of human development because, we tend to view history as this neat, orderly ladder.
Right, like a video game tech tree.
Yes, exactly like that. You step up from the Stone Age, you land safely on the Bronze Age, and then you climb right up into the Iron Age.
Nice and simple.
But when you actually dive into the data, you realize that ladder is a total illusion.
Okay, how so?
Well, first, we need to establish what we actually mean when we say an ancient culture enters the Bronze Age.
Right, what's the actual definition?
By definition, a civilization hits this milestone when it either starts producing bronze, so smelting copper and alloying it with tin, or sometimes arsenic.
Arsenic, wow, okay.
Yeah, but dangerous. Or they enter it when they begin trading for bronze with other producing regions.
Oh, so you don't even have to make it yourself to be in the Bronze Age.
Exactly. And this didn't happen everywhere all at once. Like, it started in the Old World around 3000 BC, but it unfolded at wildly different times and in wildly different ways all across the globe.
Which, okay, that brings up a really foundational question for me. And honestly, something that has always confused me about this whole timeline.
Sure. What is it?
We know what the era is, but why did bronze take off before iron?
Yeah, that's the big one.
Right, because if you look at the Earth's crust, terrestrial iron is practically everywhere. You'd literally trip over it.
Yeah, it's super abundant.
So it seems like the much more obvious jump from stone tools. Why did humans spend centuries, messing around with this rare alloy instead of just using iron?
That is the intuitive trap right there. You look at the raw abundance of iron and think, well, obviously that's the next step.
Right.
But the secret and the massive technological hurdle for early humans was heat.
Just getting the fire hot enough.
Exactly. To smelt iron from its ore, you need to reach and, crucially, sustain a temperature of roughly 1,250 degrees Celsius.
Which is, wait, that's basically a contained volcano.
Pretty much. Early humans just couldn't achieve or control that kind of thermal energy yet. But copper.
Yeah.
Copper has a much more forgiving melting point. It's about 1,085 degrees Celsius.
Okay, still hot, but lower.
Right. And tin, the crucial second ingredient for bronze, that melts at just 232 degrees.
Oh, wow. That is a massive difference in the energy required.
It's a monumental difference. And the timeline of human invention overlaps beautifully here. Because by around 6,000 BC, Neolithic people were already building these complex pottery kilns to bake clay.
Oh, to make bowls and stuff.
Exactly. And those kilns were designed to trap heat. They could reach temperatures of at least 900 degrees Celsius.
So they were already, right on the edge of the temperatures they needed.
Yes. Structurally, ancient humans were operating right on the cusp of metallurgy. That pottery tech put the melting of copper and tin totally within their grasp.
That is so cool.
Right. In fact, we see the very earliest known bronze in the Makop culture of the North Caucasus as early as the mid-4th millennium BC.
The North Caucasus, okay.
Yeah, though they were using arsenic instead of tin to make what we call arsenical bronze.
Okay, so it's sort of like a baking recipe.
How do you mean?
Like, you finally engineer an oven that works perfectly. It can hit the exact temperature you need to bake this incredible new type of bread.
I like this analogy.
But there's a major catch. One of the crucial ingredients for this new recipe tin is incredibly rare in nature.
Oh, exceptionally rare.
I mean, copper is relatively common, right?
Right.
But tin only occurs in a few highly concentrated pockets around the world.
That's right.
So if tin is that hard to find, how did ancient people even scrounge up enough of it to define an entire era of human existence?
Well, the mechanism of how they found it is actually one of the most painstaking parts of the era.
I can imagine.
The earliest tin deposits weren't mined from deep underground shafts with pickaxes, like you might picture.
Right, they didn't have heavy machinery.
Exactly. They were alluvial.
Alluvial. Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning the tin ore had eroded out of rocks over millennia and washed down into rivers.
Oh, like panning for gold.
Exactly like that. Ancient people literally had to pan for it in streams. They were sifting through freezing water and gravel just to find these heavy little black pebbles of tin oxide.
Wow.
It's the exact same physical method prospectors used during the California gold rush, just thousands of years earlier.
Panning for the ingredients of an empire in a cold river. That paints such a vivid picture.
It really does.
But, I mean, if it requires that much intense manual labor to find a rare ingredient, the resulting metal must have been astronomically expensive.
Oh, it was essentially the ancient equivalent of enriched uranium or maybe aerospace-grade titanium today.
So not exactly something you'd make a cheap shovel out of.
Not at all. And that brings us to a major reality check for anyone listening. Because bronze was so rare and expensive to produce, the era was not democratized whatsoever.
What do you mean?
Well, imagine you are an ordinary farmer living in Mesopotamia at the time.
Okay, I'm a farmer.
You are absolutely not using a bronze plow. You are likely still using stone, wood, and bone tools to farm, just exactly like your ancestors did.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Bronze was almost exclusively hoarded by the elites. They used it for high-status art and advanced weaponry.
So calling it the Bronze Age is almost like a branding trick.
Ah, a branding trick. I like that.
Seriously, though. It gives you this false impression that everyone was walking around with shiny bronze hammers. But in reality, like 90% of the population was basically still living in the Stone Age.
That is exactly the case. And because of its extreme value, bronze was keenly recycled.
Oh, they wouldn't just throw it away.
Never. You rarely find a broken bronze sword just tossed in an ancient landfill. It was melted down, recast, and used again and again.
That makes total sense. And it sets up the next huge leap in the timeline, I think.
Where are you going with this?
Well, because tin was incredibly rare, but absolutely essential for a king to maintain military and political supremacy over his rivals.
Right.
These rulers couldn't just stay in their local valleys. They had to go out and secure a tin supply.
Yes.
And this desperate need for a single raw material basically forced the creation of the first truly globalized economy.
You hit the nail on the head. The logistics of it are staggering to think about.
I bet.
You have these massive, booming empires forming in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt.
Right, the classic ancient civilizations.
But geographically, they are completely starved of the raw materials needed to maintain their dominance. So they establish these extensive, highly complex trade routes to funnel those resources inward.
Yeah, the sources mention these massive river routes like the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, acting as this ancient interstate highway system.
Precisely.
And then you have these brutal overland caravan routes, too, which apparently only became possible because humans had recently domesticated the camel.
Yep, the ships of the desert.
So they were linking unimaginable distances. But earlier, in the intro, I mentioned bringing rocks from Britain. That wasn't just an exaggeration, was it?
Not at all. The data we're looking at today shows hard scientific proof of networks stretching across the entire known world.
How do we actually know that for sure?
Archaeologists use something called isotopic analysis on Mediterranean bronze artifacts.
Isotopic analysis. Okay, give us the breakdown.
To put it simply, isotopes are slightly different versions of the same chemical element, and the ratio of certain isotopes, like lead or tin, acts as a geographical fingerprint.
So it tells you exactly where the rock came from.
Exactly. It tells us exactly where the metal was mined. And when scientists test some of the tin found in ancient Mediterranean bronze, the isotopic fingerprint points all the way to Cornwall in Bronze Age Britain.
Wait, I really want to make sure the scale of this is landing for everyone listening.
It's massive.
You are talking about mining ore in England, getting it across the English Channel, and then transporting it through the river systems of continental Europe.
Or sailing it around the Atlantic coast.
All the way into the Mediterranean Sea, thousands of years ago.
Yep.
That level of interconnectedness is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It really reminds me of the modern semiconductor supply chain.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
Like every nation needs microchips to run their military and economy today, right?
Yeah.
But the manufacturing is highly concentrated in places like Taiwan.
Exactly.
So you get these massive, critical, global lines of trade just to keep civilization humming.
That is a highly accurate parallel. And just like modern global trade requires complex administration, shipping manifests, international law, currency exchange.
Right, mountains of paperwork.
Exactly. So did the Bronze Age tin trade. Moving heavy goods over thousands of miles, dealing with different languages and cultures along the route, it creates an immense logistical weight.
You have to keep track of it all.
Yes, and that administrative pressure directly fueled the need for record keeping.
Which leads to the invention of writing.
There it is.
Cuneiform in Mesopotamia, hieroglyphs in Egypt.
Yeah.
But I want to challenge that narrative a little bit, if I can.
Oh, please do.
Is it truly a direct cause and effect relationship? Like, did the tin trade actually create the need for writing?
Okay, I see where you're going.
Or did writing just happen to develop at the same time because populations were booming and people were gathering in these massive cities like Uruk? Wouldn't they need writing just to track local grain taxes anyway?
It is definitely a symbiotic relationship, for sure. But scholars heavily emphasize trade as the primary catalyst.
Why is that?
Well, here is the mechanism at play. If you are a local chief tracking 50 bushels of wheat from the farm next door, human memory and maybe a few tally marks on a stick might suffice.
Sure, you can remember your neighbor's debt.
Right. But when you are a sprawling empire tracking luxury goods, spices, textiles, and precious metals arriving via multiple caravans from hundreds of miles away,
Okay, yeah.
human memory categorically fails. You need a permanent, standardized system of accounting. Writing emerges primarily as a tool of state commerce. And crucially, whoever develops writing first is generally recognized as transitioning out of prehistory and into recorded history.
Because now they aren't just leaving behind, trash and ruined walls. They're actually leaving us receipts.
Yes, receipts.
They are speaking to us directly.
Right. And these expansive trade networks didn't just move physical metal and spices. They served as conduits for ideas.
Oh, like technology transfer.
Exactly. We see the first true intermingling of human technological genius. A perfect example from the sources is an artifact found in the Indus Valley.
What was it?
It's a 6,000-year-old copper amulet from a site called Mehrgar. It's shaped like a spoked wheel, and it is the earliest known example of a technique called lost wax casting.
Okay, I've heard of lost wax casting, but can you break down how it actually works for us?
Certainly. It's brilliant in its simplicity. So an artisan sculpts a highly detailed object out of beeswax.
Okay, beeswax.
They then encase that wax sculpture entirely in clay, and they fire it in a kiln.
Ah, so the clay gets hard.
Yes, the heat hardens the clay into a perfect mold. Meanwhile, the wax melts and runs out through a tiny hole they leave in the bottom, hence the term lost wax.
Oh, I never put that together.
Yeah. And finally, they pour molten bronze into that hollow clay shell. Once it cools, they break the clay, and it reveals a perfect metal replica of the original wax sculpture.
That is incredible engineering for 6,000 years ago.
It really is. And the fascinating part is that we find evidence of this exact, highly specific technique in the Indus Valley, across the Iranian plateau, and over in Mesopotamia.
So they were sharing the tech.
Yes. That kind of shared technological methodology is the direct downstream effect of these deeply interconnected trade routes.
Okay, so the Mediterranean and the Near East are using bronze to drive this brutal utilitarian trade and military machine.
Right.
But I think it's crucial we don't treat this era as a monolith.
Good point.
Because if we pivot away from the Mediterranean and look at how the rest of the world utilized this tech, the underlying psychology shifts completely.
Absolutely. The transition and application of metallurgy was not uniform across the globe by any means.
Let's look at China, starting with cultures like the Mahiao and the Urlitu.
Yes, fascinating cultures.
They didn't just use bronze for sharper spears or better plowshares. They elevated it into a profoundly spiritual medium.
They really did.
The sources talk about how they created these massive, elaborate ritual vessels, like the dings, which were these giant, heavy sacrificial tripods used in ancestor worship.
And those vessels are unmistakable if you see them in a museum. They were often heavily decorated with the todi motif.
The todi, what is that exactly?
They are these highly stylized, intensely symmetrical, almost haunting animal or demon faces cast directly into the metal.
Creepy, but cool.
Very. In early Chinese culture, bronze was a material reserved primarily for communicating with the divine and honoring the ancestors.
And what absolutely blows my mind about this is the permanence of it.
The inscriptions, right.
Yes. The sources highlight that they would cast inscriptions directly into these bronze vessels. While other cultures were writing on papyrus or clay tablets that can easily be burned or washed away.
Or just crumble over time.
Exactly. Early Chinese historians were literally casting their dedications, their treaties, and their royal decrees into an indestructible medium.
It's a masterful use of the technology to ensure cultural survival.
It's just genius.
But, if you want to see an entirely different, almost rebellious trajectory, we just have to look at sub-Saharan Africa.
Oh, this is one of my favorite details in the entire source text.
It's so surprising.
Because in sub-Saharan Africa, they basically looked at the Bronze Age and said, no thanks, we're skipping this.
Huh. They essentially bypassed it entirely, yes.
How does that even happen?
Well, archaeological evidence shows that in many African cultures, the smelting of copper and the smelting of iron appeared at roughly the exact same time.
That's wild.
Yeah, there was no distinct centuries-long Bronze Age where alloys dominated before iron took over. They just went straight to iron.
Okay, think about the device you, the listener, are using right now.
Yeah, your phone.
Is this African timeline essentially like a modern developing nation completely skipping the incredibly expensive process of laying copper telephone wires everywhere?
Oh, I see.
And just jumping straight into building 5G cellular networks? Like, they just bypass the intermediate infrastructure completely.
That leapfrogging analogy is spot on. They went straight to the more advanced tech.
That's amazing.
Now, there is an active, ongoing debate among scholars about the mechanism of this leap.
Like how they figured it out.
Exactly. Did sub-Saharan cultures develop complex iron smelting completely independently through their own experimentation?
Which would be incredible.
Or was the knowledge introduced across the harsh barrier of the Sahara Desert, or via the Indian Ocean trade winds?
Right, from travelers.
Regardless of the origin, the result completely shatters that orderly stone-bronze-iron ladder we visualize in museums.
It totally breaks the ladder.
It does.
And speaking of how technology travels, the sources highlight a massive archaeological mystery back in Asia that shows just how wild human migration could be.
This brings us to what archaeologists term the Sema Turbino phenomenon.
Right. The data points to this rapid, explosive migration of people, starting from the Altai Mountains.
Which is right on the rugged border of modern Siberia and Mongolia.
And this started around 2000 BC. And when the sources say rapid, they really mean it. Can you explain the sheer scale of this movement?
Oh, it's staggering. We are talking about a highly mobile culture pushing across a frontier of roughly 4,000 miles.
4,000 miles. That is insane.
They migrated westward into the forests of Northeast Europe. They went eastward across China and southward all the way down to Vietnam and Thailand.
And how long did this take?
The archaeological record suggests this massive expansion happened over the course of just 5 or 6 generations.
5 or 6 generations.
It's incredibly fast.
Just to cover an entire continent, bringing advanced bronze metallurgy and in some areas the revolutionary technology of horseback riding. Yeah. It fundamentally changes how you view ancient humanity. Like, we tend to think of ancient peoples as isolated in their own little bubbles.
Stuck in their mud huts.
Right, but human borders were incredibly fluid.
They were highly adaptable and constantly moving.
Yeah.
And this brings us to a critical and perhaps terrifying inflection point in the data.
Uh-oh. Terrifying how?
Well, we've established this highly interconnected, booming global economy spanning vast distances, right?
Right.
It relies on specialized manufacturing, international shipping, and complex supply chains.
Which, again, sounds exactly like the modern world.
It does, but high connectivity carries a fatal flaw.
Okay, what is it?
It's not like a house of cards falling. It's more like an apex predator in a highly specialized ecosystem.
Go on.
If you are an apex predator that only eats one specific type of prey and a disease wipes out that prey, you starve. The entire system is rigid.
Oh, I see.
And that specialized rigidity is exactly what caused the late Bronze Age collapse in the Aegean around 1200 BC.
The collapse, yeah. You have these massive, seemingly invincible empires, the Mycenaeans, the Minoans, the Hittites, and within a very short window, their palaces burn and their societies just fall apart.
Just collapse into ash.
The sources outline a barrage of localized catastrophes. Several client states of the Minoan Empire lost huge swaths of their populations to famine and pestilence.
It was a cascade of systemic failures. You had massive environmental shocks, notably the devastating Thera or Santorini volcanic eruption.
Right, a massive volcano.
The sheer force of the eruption and the resulting tsunami likely obliterated the Cretan navy and completely destroyed the coastal trading towns.
Which heavily crippled the Minoan civilization's ability to move goods.
Exactly.
And because the entire Bronze Age economy is this interconnected web, when the center of your trade network takes a hit, the edges starve.
That's the rigidity we talked about.
Right. If there's a drought in Anatolia, the caravans stop.
Mm.
Suddenly, no one is getting the tin they need to make the tools to harvest the crops or the weapons to defend the walls.
And we also have to factor in self-inflicted wounds here.
What do you mean?
Remember the immense heat required for smelting we discussed earlier.
The 1,000 degrees, yeah.
Achieving that requires fuel, massive amounts of charcoal. And to make a single batch of charcoal, you have to slowly burn huge piles of timber.
Oh, no.
The sources note that the insatiable demand for fuel to keep the bronze industry running actually exhausted the entire forested landscape of Cyprus.
Wow.
In less than 50 years.
Less than 50 years to completely deforest an island just to keep the forges burning.
Yes.
That is a staggering environmental cost.
Yeah.
You deplete your local environment, you get hit by a volcanic shockwave, the fragile tin supply chain snaps.
And suddenly these highly advanced, specialized empires completely unraveled.
Damn.
Which is precisely why iron eventually became the dominant metal.
Oh, because they were forced to use it.
Yes. It wasn't because early iron was superior. In fact, early wrought iron was often softer and much harder to work than high-quality bronze.
Wait, really? I always assumed iron was just instantly better.
Not at all.
Huh.
But iron became king because the global tin network ceased to exist. Iron ore is found everywhere. You didn't need an international supply chain to forge an iron spear.
You can just dig it up locally.
Exactly. The transition to the Iron Age was, at its core, a survival mechanism born out of localized resilience when globalization failed.
That reframes the entire transition for me.
It changes everything, right?
Totally. Now, I have to ask about the famous Sea Peoples.
Ah, the Sea Peoples.
The sources mention these mysterious seaborne invaders from the north who attacked Egypt and other empires during this exact collapse period.
Yes, they show up in Egyptian inscriptions.
Were these invaders the actual cause of the Bronze Age collapsing? Or were they simply refugees of a system that was already falling apart from environmental disaster and broken supply chains?
That is one of the most hotly debated questions in modern archaeology.
I can imagine.
However, many scholars now interpret the Sea Peoples as a symptom of the collapse rather than the root cause.
Oh, interesting.
When you analyze the broader data, they appear to be displaced populations, masses of people fleeing drought, famine, and the breakdown of the very trade networks that had kept their urban centers alive.
So they weren't this evil conquering army. They were just desperate people looking for food in a world that was starving.
Exactly. It is a stark historical lesson in sustainability.
How so?
These ancient client states relied so heavily on the distant resources of the empire, and specifically on a single, highly fragile trade network for tin, that when disaster struck, they had zero local resilience.
Yeah, they were trapped by their own efficiency.
Right. Their entire economic model was built on globalization, and they couldn't pivot when the global flow stopped.
So to distill all of this down for you listening, the Bronze Age was far more than just a chapter where humanity learned to make harder swords.
Much more.
It was the crucial era that birthed written administration, massive global supply chains, and the very concept of urban interconnected civilization.
It was the moment humanity first went global.
Exactly.
It was an era of profound innovation, proving that technological leaps, whether alloying metals or inventing the written word, carry deeply complex, often unintended consequences.
And this isn't just dusty ancient trivia. The invisible logistics you rely on every single day, the complex international shipping networks bringing out-of-season fruit to your grocery store or microchips to your car factory.
All of it.
Those concepts are the direct descendants of the trade routes forged by Bronze Age prospectors panning for tin. We are operating on the exact same principles of long-distance dependency.
The foundational architecture of trade hasn't changed. We've simply swapped out the materials being traded.
Which leaves us with one final lingering thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
The mighty, hyper-connected Bronze Age collapsed because they structurally exhausted their local environments, like deforesting Cyprus for fuel, and built their entire civilization on the constant importation of a single, highly localized, critically rare resource.
Tin.
Right. And when the environment pushed back and the supply chain broke, their civilization went dark.
You did.
Today, our modern world is entirely dependent on burning fossil fuels and extracting incredibly rare earth metals from highly concentrated pockets of the globe to power our digital lives.
The parallels are definitely there.
Are we building a system that is infinitely more brilliant than the Bronze Age, but structurally just as prone to a sudden dark age?
It is the ultimate question of resilience, isn't it? History shows us that no network, no matter how vast or profitable, is immune to the limits of the natural world.
It definitely makes you look at that clean, orderly museum timeline a little different.
Oh, for sure.
The jump from stone to bronze to iron isn't just a ladder of smart inventions. It's a chaotic, messy story of human ingenuity, environmental limits, and brutal survival.
Well said.
So the next time you see those neat little eras laid out, remember, the reality of how we got here is always a lot more murky. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
So in 1902, the United States fundamentally changed how human medicine is regulated.
Right.
They passed legislation that created the very blueprint for what would, eventually become the FDA.
Yeah, a massive systemic leap in human safety.
Exactly. But the catalyst for that leap wasn't a pioneering doctor or a tragic hospital fire or a politician. It was a horse named Jim.
It really is an incredible starting point.
It is. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a fascinating, highly curated timeline of actual documented horses. Because, well, when you stack these sources together, you realize history isn't just a book written by human hands.
No, not at all.
Our human timeline is, entirely co-authored by these animals.
It is a really striking shift in perspective when you look at it that way. I've been analyzing the documentation on these specific horses, and the overarching theme here is this profound trajectory of utility shifting into partnership.
Right.
The role of these animals didn't just change randomly. It evolved exactly in step with human advancement.
Yeah.
As our civilization's needs shifted from, conquest to science to entertainment, the horse's role mirrored those changes with just incredible precision.
And for you listening right now, whether you're a history buff or you just love a good aha moment, you're going to see how deeply intertwined our everyday existence is with this species.
Absolutely.
Every time you pick up a prescription at the pharmacy and trust that it's safe, you are indirectly relying on the legacy of a horse.
You really are.
But, before we get to the science lab, we have to start where humanity usually starts its historical narratives.
Right, with power.
Power, status, and warfare.
Yeah, this first section of our sources acts as a sort of who's who of antiquity and empire. In the ancient world, a horse was, it was the ultimate display of royal prerogative.
The sheer status symbol of it is hard to wrap your head around today.
Oh, for sure.
It's not like a modern billionaire buying a super yacht or, a head of state driving a custom armored vehicle. Those are just objects.
Right, they don't have a soul.
Exactly. Take Alexander the Great and his favorite horse, Bucephalus.
Yes, a perfect example.
When Bucephalus died after a battle in 326 BCE, Alexander didn't just hold some lavish funeral. He founded an entirely new city and named it Bucephala in the horse's memory.
Which is just wild to think about.
Yeah.
And you also see this with the Roman Emperor Caligula.
Oh, Incitatus, right?
Yes, Incitatus.
Yeah.
Caligula was so devoted to this horse that historical rumors suggest he actually intended to appoint the animal as a high-ranking political consul.
A horse in the Senate?
Literally.
Yeah.
And even moving into the modern era, you have Queen Elizabeth II and her favorite mount, Burmese.
Which was a gift from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, if I remember the source right.
Exactly. So across millennia, the horse remains this unparalleled accessory to power.
But looking at the battlefield sources, I have a genuine question here.
Okay.
I see horses like Marengo Napoleon's war horse, who was captured by the British and actually outlived Napoleon by 8 years.
Right.
Or Comanche, who gives me absolute chills to read about.
The Little Bighorn survivor.
Yes. Comanche is the sole documented survivor of General Custer's 7th Cavalry Detachment at the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Yeah, it's a heavy story.
It is. And I always assumed cavalry horses were just, terrified animals spurred by their riders to run straight into danger. Were they just passive vehicles that happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Well, that is a really common misconception, but the historical record proves otherwise.
Really?
Yeah. In the context of ancient and medieval empires, the horse wasn't just transporting the military technology. The horse was the military technology.
Wow. Okay.
The survival of a soldier, or say, the execution of a complex flanking maneuver, it heavily relied on the individual characteristics of that specific mount. They possessed instinct, spatial memory, and just immense courage.
They were active participants.
Exactly. They were actively participating in the chaos.
I'm looking at the notes on a horse named Reckless from the Korean War, and this completely shatters that idea of the passive animal.
Reckless is unbelievable.
During the battle for Outpost Vegas in 1953, she wasn't just carrying a rider who was steering her. Reckless was making solo supply runs.
Yeah, completely unaccompanied. She was carrying critical ammunition up these steep, treacherous mountain trails, completely on her own under heavy artillery fire.
How much of that is human training versus actual equine instinct? Because, I mean, she was doing this while wounded.
Right.
She was memorizing the routes and navigating back down to carry wounded soldiers out.
It's a blend of both, but it requires incredible intelligence.
And she wasn't just recognized as a useful piece of equipment. She was officially promoted to staff sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps.
Which is amazing.
You literally have a horse outranking human soldiers.
It really speaks to a deep human acknowledgement of debt. Reckless demonstrated independent bravery.
Yeah.
For centuries, our geopolitical borders were quite literally drawn by the speed and strength of cavalry.
Yeah.
So we recognize that contribution by treating them not as tools, but as veterans and as artifacts.
Like Wexy.
Precisely. Wexy was the war horse of the Prince of Orange during the Battle of Waterloo.
And today?
Today, Wexy is stuffed, mounted, and preserved in the royal stables in The Hague. We preserve them because they are tangible pieces of the very empires they helped build.
But then a massive pivot occurs in the human timeline.
Right, industrialization.
We invent the steam engine, we figure out the internal combustion engine. Suddenly, machines and tanks start replacing cavalry on the battlefield. Tractors replace them in the agricultural fields.
The utility changes.
Logically, you would think the horse would just fade away into obsolescence. We didn't need their muscle anymore. But instead of going extinct, humans channeled them into a completely different arena. We moved out of the battlefield and into the laboratory.
We did. When we stopped relying on their muscle for brute force, we began to rely on their biology to advance our understanding of life itself. We used them to conquer entirely new frontiers in media and medicine.
The media aspect blew my mind.
The Muybridge study.
Yeah. There is a trotting horse named Occident featured in an 1878 study by the photographer Edward Muybridge. Before Hollywood, before cinema as we know it, humans were completely obsessed with the question of whether all four of a horse's hooves leave the ground at the same time when they trot.
Right. It was a heavily debated mechanical question of the era. People just couldn't agree.
So to prove it, Muybridge set up a series of tripwires and cameras to capture Occident in motion.
And in doing so, he essentially created the first motion picture.
Exactly. The animal that physically moved humanity forward for thousands of years was the subject of our very first attempt to capture movement on film.
It's very poetic.
But the biological contributions go much deeper than photography, and in some cases they are incredibly dark.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to Jim.
The story of Jim is heavy, but it is an absolute cornerstone of modern immunology and government regulation.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Well, in the late 19th and early 20th century, Jim was used to produce diphtheria antitoxin.
And for anyone who doesn't know, diphtheria was a horrific bacterial infection. They used to call it the strangling angel of children because it caused this thick coating in the back of the throat, leading to severe breathing problems and death.
It was terrifying.
But how exactly does a horse help with that?
It relied on the horse's immune system acting as a living bioreactor.
Oh, wow.
Scientists would inject a horse like Jim with safe, incremental amounts of the diphtheria toxin.
Okay.
And the horse's massive immune system would generate a huge amount of antibodies to fight it off. Then they would draw the horse's blood, extract the blood plasma containing those antibodies, and administer that serum to human children to cure them.
I mean, it's brilliant, but the lack of oversight was a ticking time bomb.
It was.
In 1901, Jim tragically contracted tetanus.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't any rigorous federal oversight or standardized testing at the time, the people extracting his plasma didn't realize he was sick.
Yeah, no idea.
So some of the diphtheria antitoxin samples drawn from him were contaminated with the tetanus bacteria, and they were just sent out to the public.
It resulted in the deaths of over a dozen children in St. Louis. It was a horrific public health disaster.
But the immediate reaction to that tragedy is what changed the world. That specific disaster directly led the U.S. Congress to pass the Biologics Control Act of 1902.
Exactly. That act mandated the licensing, inspection, and rigorous safety testing of all biological products.
Which was unheard of before.
Completely. It is the absolute foundation of modern pharmaceutical regulation in the United States. It set the precedent that eventually evolved into the FDA.
Every regulatory framework we rely on today to ensure our vaccines and medicines won't harm us was built on the silent, tragic sacrifice of a horse named Jim.
It really puts it in perspective.
And their biological contribution to human science didn't stop a century ago. Fast forward to 2003, and we hit the absolute frontier of genetics with a horse named Prometheus.
Prometheus represents a complete rewriting of the fundamental rules of biology.
Yeah, she was the first cloned horse.
Right.
And I need to pause here because the mechanics of this are mind-bending.
They are.
The sources state Prometheus was carried to term by her own genetic donor. Let me make sure I'm translating this correctly. Prometheus essentially gave birth to her own identical twin.
That is essentially correct.
Yeah.
And it completely defines traditional concepts of mammalian reproduction.
Right, because normally you need two sets of DNA.
Exactly. Normally, reproduction is like building a house using two different blueprints, half from the mother, half from the father.
Right.
But through a process called somatic cell nuclear transfer, scientists took a skin cell from a mare, extracted her complete DNA, and inserted it into an empty egg cell.
So they basically handed the builders a single completed blueprint.
Precisely.
Hmm.
But the biological anomaly isn't just the cloning itself, it's the pregnancy.
Because of the immune system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Usually a mother's immune system detects a fetus because half of its DNA is foreign. It belongs to the father.
Oh, I see.
That detection triggers the necessary immune responses and pregnancy hormones. But in Prometheus' case, the surrogate mother was carrying a fetus with 100% her own DNA.
So her body shouldn't have even known it was pregnant.
Her immune system shouldn't have even recognized it. The fact that she successfully carried her own clone to term was a scientific miracle.
The horse went from carrying emperors across continents to carrying humanity across the absolute limits of genetic science.
It's an incredible leap.
But with machines handling the heavy lifting and, medical research heavily regulated and shifting to other methods, what happens to the rest of the horses?
They find a new purpose.
Humans took all that freed up equine athleticism and intelligence, and we channeled it into a new obsession-breaking boundaries for our own entertainment.
The transition from utility to spectacle.
Yeah.
It is a fascinating era of the human-equine timeline. We began to ask not what the horse could do for us, but what they could do with us.
And this section of the sources is full of incredible characters that blur the line between animal and human intellect.
Oh, definitely.
You have Clever Hans, the famous German horse from the early 1900s who performed math tricks.
Yes.
And Mohammed, another horse allegedly capable of reading and performing arithmetic.
Yeah.
I have to laugh because, I know humans who struggle with basic arithmetic, and here are crowds gathering to watch a horse do multiplication.
Huh.
How did this actually work?
Well, it reveals a massive amount about human psychology, specifically our deep inherent need to project human traits onto these animals.
We want them to be like us.
Exactly. We desperately want to bridge the communication gap. In the case of Clever Hans, a psychologist named Oscar Funkst eventually investigated and proved the horse wasn't doing math at all.
So it was just a scam.
Not intentionally. It was an involuntary psychological phenomenon now known as the Clever Hans effect.
Okay, how does that work?
The horse was incredibly adept at reading the microscopic subconscious body language of his human handler. When Hans tapped his hoof and reached the correct answer, the handler's posture would slightly relax or, their breathing would change. Hans simply learned that those micro-expressions meant he should stop tapping to get a carrot.
He wasn't a mathematician. He was a master of reading human emotion.
Precisely.
Which makes total sense. We desperately want to see ourselves in them, which perfectly explains why we put them in Hollywood and literally gave them human voices.
Mr. Ed.
Yes. You have Bamboo Harvester, who portrayed the talking horse in the classic TV series Mr. Ed.
And it wasn't just a matter of putting a horse in front of a camera. The production treated him like a human actor.
Really?
Yeah, the sources note Bamboo Harvester actually had a public double, a horse named Pumpkin to handle stressful promotional appearances.
Even horses have stunt doubles.
They do.
And then there's Popcorn Delights, the equine actor who played the title role in the blockbuster film Seabiscuit. We transitioned from riding them into actual battles to putting them on the silver screen to tell our historical narratives for us.
We did. And alongside the entertainers, you have the pure athletes. Once we didn't need them for plowing fields, we began to selectively breed for singular, extraordinary traits.
Right.
This resulted in what we call foundation sires.
Yeah, the sources highlight the Darley Arabian for the thoroughbred breed and Figure 4, the Morgan breed. And for anyone unfamiliar with the term, a foundation sire means tracing an entire modern breed back to the genetics of a single male ancestor.
It is a massive genetic bottleneck intentionally designed by humans. It's estimated that over 90% of all modern thoroughbred racehorses trace their male line back to the Darley Arabian.
90%.
Yes. We essentially isolated the genetic source code for speed and stamina, and we've iterated on it for centuries.
And that extreme selective breeding leads to the modern legends. Let's look at dressage, which is essentially highly disciplined equine gymnastics.
A good way to describe it?
You have Totilas, a Dutch warm-blood stallion who became the first horse to ever score above a 90 in competition. He hit a 90.75 and a 92.3 in 2009.
And to understand why that matters, you have to understand that scoring above a 90 in dressage was long thought to be mathematically impossible based on the judging criteria.
Because you start with a perfect score, and judges deduct points for every tiny microscopic mistake in these highly unnatural, complex movements.
Correct. To score a 90 means virtually flawless execution of movements that require immense physical strength and total mental synchronization with the rider. Totilas broke the math.
He broke the math, and then Vallegro comes along and shatters Totilas' world records, scoring a 93.975 in 2013, and then an astonishing 94.3 in 2014.
They're pushing the absolute ceiling of physical perfection.
They really are. But speaking of ceilings, I want to talk about the physical limits of what a horse can do, because the source document highlights a Chilean show jumper named Huaso.
Ah, yes. This is perhaps one of the most compelling records we have.
It's wild.
In 1949, Huaso and his rider set the high jump world record by clearing an obstacle that was 2.47 meters high.
That is 8 feet and 1 inch.
It is massive.
Imagine the sheer physics of lifting a 1,000-pound animal over an 8-foot wall. And according to the records, as of today, as of 2025, that 1949 record remains entirely unbroken. Think about that for a second.
It's incredible.
Over 75 years later, nobody has touched it.
It is a striking anomaly in the world of sports. If you look at human athletics, track and field, swimming, weightlifting, our records are broken every few years.
Right.
We constantly push the human biological limit further through better nutrition, advanced training regimens, and technology.
But with Huaso's unbroken record, does that mean we've hit a wall?
It heavily implies that in the realm of human-animal collaboration, we may have already hit a hard biological ceiling decades ago.
Wow.
We might have literally maxed out what a horse and rider can physically achieve together in terms of vertical jumping.
That is wild, though nature and selective breeding do still throw us some extreme physical outliers.
Oh, definitely.
Just looking at the physical extremes in the records, you have Samson, a Shire horse from the 1800s who is the tallest on record. The source says he stood at a massive 21.25 hands. For anyone who doesn't measure things in body parts, a hand is 4 inches. So 21.25 hands is 86.5 inches high. That is over 7 feet tall at the shoulder, not even counting his head and neck.
Unbelievable.
And then you have Old Billy, the longest living verified horse in history, who lived to be 62 years old.
The physical diversity, from a 7-foot-tall draft horse to a clone in an Italian laboratory, is a testament to how heavily human intervention has shaped this species.
We really did mold them.
We molded them to be taller, faster, more agile, and more enduring, all to suit our immediate needs and desires at any given point in history.
Okay, we need to take a step back and look at the massive picture we've painted today, because it is an incredible journey.
It spans all of civilization.
We started thousands of years ago with Bucephalus carrying Alexander the Great across the ancient world, physically establishing empires.
Right.
We moved into the 20th century to see Jim silently bearing the burden of disease, inadvertently creating the modern FDA and saving countless human lives.
And then Prometea.
Yes, we saw Prometheus breaking the fundamental laws of mammalian reproduction to advance genetics, and we ended up with Bamboo Harvester acting on our televisions, and Huaso jumping so incredibly high in 1949 that no horse and rider have matched it since.
The timeline of these animals is, in every meaningful way, a mirror reflecting human ambition.
Beautifully said.
We use them to conquer the world, and we use them to understand the world, and finally we use them to entertain ourselves in it.
So to you, listening right now, the next time you are driving down a country road and you see a horse standing quietly in a pasture, I want you to remember what we talked about today.
Yes.
You aren't just looking at a beautiful animal, you are looking at a living museum. Within that animal's DNA is the history of human warfare, our greatest scientific achievements, our art, and our unyielding desire to push physical limits.
And that leads to a final thought we should leave you to mull over today.
Go for it.
For 5,000 years, human progress was entirely dependent on the horse's back. Our survival, our industry, our territorial expansion, it all required their labor. But now, for the very first time in our shared history, we don't need them.
We don't.
We've replaced their utility with combustion engines, advanced robotics, and synthetic biology. We don't need them for agriculture or warfare.
We have completely unburdened them from the jobs they held for millennia.
Precisely. So as we look ahead to the rest of the 21st century and beyond, how will this ancient partnership evolve now that it is based purely on choice rather than strict necessity?
That's a great question.
Are horses simply destined to become living artifacts of our past, carefully preserved and admired from a distance? Or, freed from the burden of our labor, is there an entirely new, unwritten chapter of their timeline waiting to be authored?
We often think of history as a book written exclusively by human hands, but today we saw the binding that actually held the pages together. Who knows what the next chapter will look like? You know that immense satisfaction of watching like a perfectly set up Rube Goldberg machine?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's mesmerizing.
Right. You flick that first domino and then, that hits a marble. The marble rolls down a ramp.
And the ramp triggers a catapult, yeah.
Exactly. It's this beautiful physical chain reaction. Once that very first domino falls, well, the end result is just absolutely guaranteed.
Right. It's the comfort of unbroken causality. I mean, you're watching a system where A leads to B, which inevitably leads to C. Every action is completely determined by the action that preceded it, kind of writing a script that just cannot be changed.
But what if right in the middle of that perfectly engineered setup, the marble just, stopped?
Or the domino fell backward.
Yeah. Or the catapult launched sideways for literally no physical reason at all. Today, we're tearing up the rulebook of cause and effect. We're exploring the science of indeterminism to find out if the universe is a predictable machine, or if pure, unadulterated chance is the only thing giving us free will. Okay, let's unpack this because today's stack of notes comes from a massive deep dive into the concept of indeterminism.
Which is quite the rabbit hole.
It really is. So where do we even begin to dismantle the idea that everything happens for a strict, unbreakable reason?
Well, we basically have to start by rethinking our everyday assumptions about how causes actually work.
Yeah.
Because most of us walk around assuming that if an event happens, there was a singular definitive cause that forced it to happen.
Right, like cause and effect. Simple.
Exactly. But philosophers and scientists, they break causality down further. The most crucial distinction we need to make here is between what we call necessary and sufficient causes.
Necessary versus sufficient. Okay, this is one of those logic puzzle concepts, but once it clicks, it kind of changes how you view the world. I always think of oxygen in a campfire.
That's a great example.
Right, because oxygen is a necessary cause. You absolutely cannot have a fire without it. But just because there's oxygen in the air around you right now, your living room isn't spontaneously combusting.
Exactly, and hopefully it stays that way.
Yeah.
That distinction is vital. Oxygen is necessary, but it's not sufficient on its own to guarantee a fire. Now, contrast that with a sufficient cause. If X is a sufficient cause of Y, it means if X happens, Y is definitely going to happen.
Got it.
So indeterminists don't actually deny that causes exist. They just argue that the universe might only be driven by necessary causes rather than sufficient ones. The past sets the stage, but it doesn't automatically write the final script.
Okay, and I guess that leads into this idea of probabilistic causation, right? Like, we know from the source material that war doesn't always cause mass casualties.
Like with modern cyber warfare.
Exactly. Or, a singular moment of smoking a cigarette doesn't automatically cause cancer. It just increases the probability. But, okay, wait, I have to push back here. When we say smoking probabilistically causes cancer, isn't that just a fancy way of saying our science isn't precise enough yet to predict exactly who gets it?
Ah, that is the big question.
Like, if we knew every single genetic marker, every cellular state, every environmental factor of a person, wouldn't we know with 100% certainty who gets sick? Is the universe actually random, or are we just really bad at measuring it?
You're hitting on the exact divide between unpredictability and intrinsic indeterminism.
Okay, break that down for me.
So unpredictability is just what you described. It's an epistemic limitation. Basically, a limitation of our own knowledge and measuring tools. It's the idea that the universe is still a perfect machine. We just can't see all the gears. But intrinsic indeterminism claims the universe fundamentally has random elements into its very fabric. Even with a God's eye view, even with infinite knowledge of every variable, you still couldn't perfectly predict the outcome.
Oh, wow. So it's baked into the source code of reality.
Exactly. And Karl Popper had a brilliant way of framing this. He divided the world into clouds and clocks.
Clouds and clocks. I like that.
Yeah, so clocks are deterministic systems. Think of pendulums or the solar system things that are highly orderly and predictable.
Right. Tick-tock, very mechanical.
Exactly. And clouds are indeterministic systems. Think of a swarm of gnats or weather patterns, highly irregular, shifting, and unpredictable.
So the classic worldview, the Newtonian physics view, is that the universe is a giant clock.
Yes, but Popper sided with the American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce, who argued that actually all clocks are clouds to some degree.
Wait, really? All clocks are clouds?
Yeah. Even the most precise atomic clock in the world is made of vibrating atoms that have a tiny degree of physical wiggle room. Complete perfection and pure determinism are essentially illusions.
That is wild. I love that phrase, all clocks are clouds. And what's wild is that worrying about whether we live in a cloud or a clock isn't some modern anxiety born out of advanced physics. I mean, humans have been wrestling with this for thousands of years.
Oh, definitely. If we look back to ancient Greek philosophy, we see them grappling with this exact tension. Leucippus, an ancient atomist, was actually one of the first to describe the cosmos as being made of atoms submitted to a casual and unpredictable movement.
Visualizing random atomic movement way back then is just a massive leap of imagination.
It really is. And then Aristotle introduced the concept of touche, or chance. He basically said there are plenty of things that happen that have a traceable material cause. But sometimes things just happen by accident. They fall completely outside of standard natural explanations.
So he just refused to buy into the idea that absolutely every event has a singular, inevitable origin.
Exactly. But the most fleshed out ancient version of this comes from Epicurus and his concept of the Klinemen, or the swerve.
The swerve. This is my favorite part of the note.
It's so good. Epicureans believed the universe was just a bunch of atoms falling through a void. But they argue that every once in a while, completely at random, an atom would just swerve from its determined path.
Just bump into something else.
Right. It bumps into another atom, initiating an entirely new, unpredicted chain of events.
It's totally like a glitch in a video game's physics engine. You have this massive simulation running with perfect rules, but every now and then a pixel deviates, a character clips through a wall, and Epicurus was basically saying that tiny glitch, that physical loophole, is the exact space where human free will lives.
Yes.
Because without the glitch, we are just pre-programmed non-player characters.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is why he insisted on this swerve. It wasn't just a physics theory for him. It was a moral necessity.
How?
Well, he realized that if the universe was strictly determined, like if every falling atom was on a fixed path since the dawn of time, then human beings are just biological machines on a track. And if we're on a track, we can't have moral responsibility for our actions.
Right, because you didn't choose to do it. The atoms did.
Exactly. Epicurus felt so strongly about this that he explicitly wrote, "It would be better to believe in the old myths of meddling arbitrary gods who mess with our lives, rather than believing in the strict determinism of natural philosophers."
Because you can at least try to appease a chaotic god. You can't negotiate with a mathematical equation.
Precisely.
The anxiety of having no control over your fate was so intense they'd rather have chaotic gods running the show. But I mean, the ancients were just guessing at the swerve as a philosophical workaround. It actually took until the 20th century for science to prove that the universe really is fundamentally jittery.
Yes. We are talking about the birth of quantum mechanics, specifically the Copenhagen interpretation. This was the earthquake that shattered the deterministic worldview of classical physics.
Because classical physics, like Isaac Newton's laws, was basically a perfectly choreographed train schedule. If you knew the position and momentum of every train on the tracks, you could calculate where everything would be 100 years from now. And where everything was 100 years ago, it was the ultimate clock.
Right. But then scientists started looking at the subatomic level, and they found that the most basic constituents of matter, they don't behave like tiny trains on tracks.
Right.
They behave according to probabilities. This is where we run into the wave function. When a particle isn't being measured, it doesn't have a specific location. It exists as a smeared-out wave of potential locations and states.
It's everywhere and nowhere at the same time until you look at it.
Exactly. And when you finally measure it, that wave function collapses into a definite state. The particle suddenly picks a location. But the crucial part is, you cannot predict exactly where it will land.
You can only guess.
Well, you can only predict the odds of where it might land using a mathematical formula called the Born rule.
So the universe is basically rolling dice. And famously, Albert Einstein hated this.
He really did.
He literally said, God does not play dice with the universe. He just refused to believe that reality was fundamentally based on chance. So he tried to save determinism by proposing hidden variables.
Right. Einstein argued that the quantum world only looks random to us because we are missing information. If two particles interact and become entangled, their states are linked. If you measure one, it instantly dictates the state of the other, even if they are light years apart.
Which is spooky action at a distance.
Exactly. Einstein thought they must have had a secret, prearranged blueprint, a hidden variable that told them how to behave before they separated.
He thought we just couldn't read the blueprint yet. But he was wrong, right? I know we eventually tested this in the 80s with Elaine Aspect, building on physicist John S. Bell's work. How did they actually prove there was no secret blueprint?
Okay, so Bell formulated an ingenious mathematical theorem. He proved that if these particles were carrying a hidden blueprint, there was a strict statistical limit to how often their measurements could correlate when we test them at different angles.
Okay, so there's a hard mathematical cap on how in sync they could be.
Exactly. And Elaine Aspect ran the experiments, and the particles violated that limit. They correlated more often than any pre-written script would mathematically allow.
Which means they aren't following a script at all. They are deciding their state at the exact moment of measurement. The indeterminism is real, and the outcome of a quantum measurement is genuinely, intrinsically not determined until it happens.
It's pure chance. And this breakdown of the clock isn't just happening at the microscopic quantum level either.
Wait, really? Where else?
Well, a physicist and chemist named Ilya Prigogine argued that determinism falls apart at the macroscopic level when you look at complex, unstable systems.
But how does that work? I mean, if I throw a baseball, I can calculate its arc pretty predictably.
You can, because a baseball in a vacuum is a simple closed system. But Prigogine looked at thermodynamics, specifically systems operating far from equilibrium.
Okay, like what?
Think of a hurricane, or solar radiation, or a living biological cell. These systems are constantly exchanging huge amounts of energy and matter with their environment. They are inherently unstable and highly sensitive to the tiniest fluctuations.
Oh, like the butterfly effect. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and sets off a tornado in Texas.
Yes. And Prigogine's profound insight was about the arrow of time. Classical deterministic physics equations are time reversible. Mathematically, they work exactly the same forwards and backwards.
Right.
If the universe is perfectly deterministic, there is no fundamental difference between the past and the future.
Which totally contradicts our actual lived experience of time moving in one direction.
Exactly. Determinism denies the arrow of time. But Prigogine pointed out that in far from equilibrium systems, processes are irreversible. You cannot unbake a cake, and you cannot unmix a drop of ink in a glass of water.
Right, it's a one-way street.
Because these chaotic systems amplify tiny, random fluctuations, their future states cannot be calculated from their past states. They require an open future. Without irreversibility and indeterminism, time itself doesn't really have a direction.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a little frustrating. Because if indeterminism just means that at a quantum level, particles are randomly collapsing, and at a macro level, chaotic systems are just statistically unpredictable, how does that actually help us?
What do you mean?
Well, if my choices are just the result of a quantum dice roll happening in my brain, that doesn't sound like free will to me. That just sounds like chaos. Being a slave to a random number generator is just as bad as being a slave to a deterministic clock.
Ah, yes. Philosophers of science recognized this exact problem early on. Randomness alone is not control. In 1931, the physicist Arthur Hawley Compton actually tried to tackle this dilemma.
Okay, what did he suggest?
He knew we needed the randomness of quantum mechanics to break the chains of determinism, but we needed something else to actually steer the ship.
Right, so if it's not just a coin flip in my head, what's the actual mechanism?
So Compton proposed a two-stage model. He argued that first, the physical conditions of the universe, including the complex thermodynamic state of your brain, generate a range of random, undetermined possible events or thoughts.
Okay, so stage one is the generation of possibilities, just the quantum and biological noise.
Exactly. But then comes stage two, which is the act of choice. Compton argued that you exercise freedom by adding a determining factor that isn't supplied by the physical conditions alone. Your conscious intent acts as a filter. You survey the randomly generated options, and you select one, thereby determining what actually occurs.
So the universe serves up a menu of chaotic options, and my consciousness acts as the filter that decides what actually gets ordered.
That's a great way to put it.
That brings us from the cosmic level directly into our own heads, because if we are talking about choices and brain states, we have to talk about how this physically plays out in human psychology.
We do. And Robert Cain, a major contemporary philosopher on free will, has a concept called self-forming actions, or SFAs, which grounds this whole debate beautifully.
SFAs.
Yeah. Cain argues that having alternative possibilities is necessary for free will, but is not sufficient. Remember our necessary versus sufficient distinction with the oxygen and the fire.
Right. Alternative possibilities are the oxygen. You need the undetermined options. But the fire, the actual control, comes from what Cain calls ultimate responsibility.
Exactly. And this responsibility is forged during these self-forming actions.
Yeah.
An SFA is a moment of deep, agonizing indecision where you have conflicting wills.
Like a moral dilemma.
Right. Imagine you're walking to an important meeting and you see someone drop their wallet.
Uh.
Part of your character, your moral upbringing, wants to stop and help. Another part of your character, your ambition, knows you were late and wants to just keep walking.
So my brain is essentially in a neurological tug of war. How does Cain's theory resolve that without it just being a random coin flip?
Well, in that moment, you have competing neural pathways firing at the exact same time. Your brain is in a genuinely undetermined state. The outcome is not predetermined by your past habits. Whichever choice you make it by an effort of will that overcomes the indeterministic noise of the opposing choice.
Oh, wow.
And by making that choice, you lay down new neural pathways. You literally form your own character, making yourself slightly more likely to be a helpful person or a selfish person in the future.
So what does this all mean? It's like the character creation screen in a role-playing game.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, you start the game and you are distributing points into different stats. Charisma, strength, empathy. You might live 90% of your life on autopilot, acting out of habit. But those rare, agonizing moments of genuine moral conflict, those SFAs, are the moments you are pulled back to the character creation screen. You are rolling the dice, sure, but you are also actively coding your own character's future tendencies. You are building the person who will go on to make future choices.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it perfectly synthesizes our entire deep dive today. We need Epicurus's swerve. We need the quantum jitters and the thermodynamic chaos to give us a future that isn't already written. But we also need our own ultimate responsibility, our self-forming actions, to steer that swerve.
And neuroscientists are actually finding evidence for this kind of biological indeterminism, aren't they? I'm looking at the notes on Bjorn Brems and Christoph Koch. They found stochastic processes built in randomness even in the brains of simple organisms like flies. But I mean, how do you even measure free will in a fly?
It's such a brilliant experiment. Brems and his team took fruit flies and tethered them inside a tiny, completely featureless white cylinder. There was no sensory input, no changing light, no wind, no visual cues whatsoever.
So if a fly is just a deterministic biological clock, an input-output machine, a lack of input should mean a lack of output. It should just fly straight or do nothing.
Exactly the premise.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened. The flies didn't just fly straight. They continuously initiated complex, spontaneous evasive maneuvers. They darted left, darted right.
Even with no stimulus.
Even with no stimulus. The researchers analyzed the flight patterns and found they weren't just simple random noise like radio static. They matched a mathematical pattern called a levy flight, which is an optimized search strategy. The fly's brain was spontaneously generating its own behavioral noise independently of the environment.
So the fly is generating its own options. Now, I assume a fly darting left in a white tube isn't experiencing a deep moral dilemma.
No. Brems is quick to point out that a fly's unpredictable buzzing is not the same thing as human moral responsibility. It's not a complex ethical framework. But it is a biological prerequisite. It proves that biological brains evolved to be probabilistic, not strictly deterministic.
Wow.
Evolution actually favored the cloud over the clock because being slightly unpredictable is a massive survival advantage against predators.
Yeah.
If a predator can perfectly calculate your next move, well, you get eaten.
It's incredible to think about. We've journeyed all the way from the basic logic of cause and effect, learning that just because something is necessary doesn't mean it's sufficient to force an outcome. We watched the ancient Greeks invent the atomic swerve just to save humanity from feeling like pre-programmed robots.
We really covered some ground.
Yeah, we explored how Bell's theorem proved Einstein wrong, showing that the universe really does play dice with entangled particles. We saw how complex, far from equilibrium systems give time its one-way arrow. And finally, we looked inside the jittery, spontaneous brains of flies to understand how our own moments of deep indecision allow us to literally wire our own character.
It's a massive philosophical and scientific landscape, but the overarching theme is so empowering. The universe is far less like a ticking, rigid clock and much more like a shifting, dynamic cloud.
It really makes you look at your own choices differently.
It really does. And to leave you with one final mind-bending thought, there is a theory by the physicist David Bohm.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Yeah, Bohm looked at all this, the quantum randomness and the macroscopic determinism, and he speculated something brilliant. He noted that strict, predictable determinism can actually emerge from underlying chaos, thanks to the law of large numbers. But equally true, pure indeterminism and chaos can emerge from perfectly deterministic systems, like we see in classical chaos theory.
Wait, so it's not a strict binary, like it's not just one or the other.
Right. Bohm speculated that the universe might not be fundamentally just a clock or just a cloud. Instead, reality might consist of infinite alternating layers of causality and chaos, a layer of strict rules resting on a layer of randomness, resting on another layer of rules, going all the way down forever.
That is heavy, and it perfectly frames the question I want to leave you, the listener, with today. The next time you find yourself making a surprisingly spontaneous choice, whether it's taking a different route to work, or finally speaking your mind in a meeting, or even just picking up a dropped wallet, ask yourself, in that exact moment, which layer of the universe are you operating in? Are you just the marble rolling down the predetermined ramp of the Rube Goldberg machine? Or are you the sudden, inexplicable glitch that changes the machine forever?